Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And I am delighted to welcome back Lianne McCafferty. Hello, Lianne.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for having me back.
You are busy working with some very powerful ladies. We've been talking about Juno in the last interview that you did, and um, there's the book that's coming up on Juno. And today we're going to talk about a somewhat dark lady, Lilith. So tell us about Lilith. Who is she?
Okay, so Lilith, very, very fascinating. Very mysterious as well. And I think there's a lot of mystique and intrigue about Lilith. So let's go back and kind of start with the myth, okay? So there's not a huge amount known. Even the myth's a little bit in the dark, so to speak, which is Lilith, full stop, kind of in the dark. So we can go back to Babylonian and ancient Sumerian myth and Mesopotamian myth. And here we find Lilith kind of represented as a demon, a dark energy, a succubi, a vampire even. You know, this energy that came along and stole babies and seduced men, that type of thing. And then we can move more into Jewish myth. And Lilith was the first wife of Adam. Okay, and we have different versions of the myth, just like we do in, Greek and Roman mythology. There's always variation, isn't there? But essentially, she was the first female on the earth with Adam. Some say they were both formed out of clay at the same time, and some of the variations say that she was created from Adam's rib. Okay, doesn't really matter which. However, the key point when we're working with Lilith is that she refused to lie underneath Adam. She wanted to be on top. She wouldn't submit. All right. So there's a very defiant and rebellious energy to Lilith. There's a wildness, something that perhaps can't be tamed. So this wasn't acceptable. So Lilith ended up leaving the Garden of Eden, or paradise, whatever you want to call it. Some versions say she was exiled and thrown out. Some versions say that she actually left. But anyway, she ended up on the shores of the Red Sea living in a cave. And this area was populated with demons. Lilith copulated with the demons and gave birth to demon children, so to speak. Okay, so she was living a very parallel life to Adam, who existed in the Garden of Eden still, and in some variations of the myth had been replaced. Lilith had been replaced by the more compliant Eve. Okay, who just sort of went along with the rules. Um, so God wanted to find Lilith. He couldn't even find her, so sent three angels to find her. And when they did, they couldn't get her to obey. They couldn't get her to submit. So they came to some sort of arrangement whereby Lilith, who was rumored to be killing babies, and would stop doing this if the angels' names were inscribed on a bracelet, and in return, some of her demon offspring would be sacrificed. And I think in myths, when we're talking about offspring and children, we're very much talking about the creative impulse within ourselves, yeah, or creative output, metaphorically. So I think with Lilith, it's very much an energy that doesn't want to submit. And when it's forced to submit or comply, um, there's a sense that the creative impulse is sort of dimmed and it's forced to shut down. So that wildness in Lilith, it's very instinctive and it's very much key to our own creative impulses and creative energies and the way we identify ourselves. of course. So it's a very powerful, instinctive energy when we look at it in terms of the mythology.
I find that very interesting because that, although I have heard that myth, I hadn't actually heard it in its entirety. And I'm thinking about the suppression of energy.
Yeah.
And, we hear so much this rather, I think now, overused term about the toxic masculine. And I'm listening to this version of the myth, and I'm thinking about toxic feminine, the devouring mother. But maybe what we're really looking at is the suppression of energy. And when the suppression of energy happens, how what results is anger and aggression of one kind or another. And so I think that's what I'm feeling when I'm listening to the myth, told in the way that you have it.
Yeah, yeah. There's a deep well of power and energy, but resentment and energy. And it's a very, very primal energy, Lilith. And what I want to make clear when I'm talking about Lilith here, I'm talking about Black Moon Lilith. Okay. And in a minute, I'll come on to the astronomy so we can make clear exactly which point we're talking about in the natal chart. All right. But let's get the kind of archetype of Lilith out there first, so to speak. Yeah, there's a deep well of power and forward thinking and independence. And when that's stifled, it does build up, and it can, it's anger, rage. But I think a more primal word for anger is rage, isn't it?
I always
Uncontrollable
think of
rage.
race in relation
Rage. Yeah.
to Lilith. And it's interesting because the equivalent of this, he doesn't have her backstory and excuse for this, is Aries versus Mars. The Greek version of Aries is so much raw. It's just this pure rage and destruction. Whereas when we come to looking at Mars, it's a much more structured, warlike energy, but there's a purpose to it. There's something there, that it's not just fury for its own sake. And I'm just thinking of, again, of that masculine feminine equivalent, I guess.
Yeah.
And it did make me think of Aries versus Mars. And here we have, as you said, I always think of her in terms of deep rage and resentment.
It is very much so. And what we can do as well is look at the fact rage is powerful, okay? And when rage comes out, it's terrifying. It can be quite frightening. It's an incredibly powerful emotion. And rage has to be instigated by something, okay? And often it comes from a place where we find something deeply, deeply unfair, or where we're demonized, or where we're treated unfairly. And Lilith is very much about demonization as well. Okay, so Lilith was cast out living amongst the demons because she refused to comply. She refused to submit to Adam, which we could equate to patriarchy, in this sense. But think back in history to all the witches who were burnt at the stake because they were powerful. They had a powerful feminine energy, and the patriarchy were terrified of women's power. So let's demonize women, let's scapegoat them and burn them at the stake. And that still happens today, metaphorically. It does, yeah.
It's it does. And as I say, I think there's plenty of abuse uh, aimed at both sexes in different ways. Uh,
Yeah.
and so and here, but yes, the demonizing, um, I think, is a very interesting thing because it's very linked to nature, and it's the because you use the word wild, and I think that's the key here.
Mhm.
What's wild is untamed and uncivilized. To civilize is to tame. And so here we have this. I think this is very much about our relationship with nature too. And and female energy, or yin energy, if we can put it like that, has always been linked with nature. And we have so many goddesses that are linked with nature. Uh,
Mother Earth, yeah, that type of
it's the
thing.
earth, nature, all of that. It's there. And we still can't get our heads around what to do about nature. We treat nature as a problem. We want to tame it. I was doing an interview for my channel Pet Talk yesterday with a wonderful um, feline specialist. And she was talking about how, where she lives in Spain, cats are kept indoors. And we were discussing this very thing about how we're as we become more and more disconnected from nature, the more problematic we see nature, and we're transferring that onto the poor cats who must be kept in because they hunt.
Yeah,
um, and here dogs banned on beaches in the summer.
yeah.
It's just this constant desire to to control nature because of seeing her as a problem. And I think looking at Lilith, there is that side of it, I feel.
It is. And again, it's anything that's seen as a power or that it doesn't fit neatly into a box. Right, we'll just demonize it and cast it away, because it's too problematic. And Lilith will not be boxed in. You cannot fit Lilith into a box. It's just a really wild, untamable, beautiful energy. And it's very much in some ways, the shadow of the moon. We all have our moons, our habits, our emotional instincts, but the moon can be conditioned in some ways. We grow up and we're conditioned by our family, by our environment, by our, upbringing, all those types of things. Our moon can be trained in some ways. Lilith can't. And I do think it's the very opposite of the natal moon. And if we move on to the astronomy now, it becomes even more clear because Black Moon Lilith is actually, it's not even a physical body. It's a point in space. It's a reference. If we think about the moon's orbit of the Earth, it's not even regular. Okay, it's slightly elliptical. So sometimes the moon's closer to the Earth than at other times. And Lilith is, right, we've got two options here because no one can quite agree on it. Lilith can be, this is Black Moon Lilith, can be the apogee of the moon's orbit, which is the moon's furthest point from the Earth, or it can be some point in between or a channel in between. So it can even be, a channel or point of lunar related energy. But either way, it's out there in the space, it's out there in the dark, it's out there in the void. And it's almost like the shadow of the moon in some ways, I think. And it's like the moon unbridled. If the moon was set free and would get everything that it needs without being conditioned or questioned or, you know, um, and I think Lilith as well represents what we want, but we're told that we can't have. And who has the right to tell us what we can't have? You know? Um, that's a really kind of profound question in its own right, I think. And Lilith will just stand there and go, I want that. And when Lilith says that, that's when she gets demonized if it doesn't fit with what Lilith should want. Does that make sense?
It does. And
Yeah.
just so many thoughts all there at once. Firstly, thinking about the attempts to dam water and the problems that creates. Again, it's the suppression of an energy,
Yeah.
and the link with nature again. And it's made me think. We had mice appearing in our kitchen earlier this year, and we discovered where the hole was and filled because we don't want to be killing mice. We just want them to go away. So
Yeah.
filled it in. Fast forward 3 months, and they found our way into our loft. And I think, this is the thing is that when we try to suppress, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because, and every parent out there should know this, that when they try to stop children from doing things that they don't want them to do, they are almost guaranteeing that that's what they're going to do. And that the thing to do is to redirect. So we have to work out how to redirect our mice so that they will leave our loft. We never anticipated that, unable to get into their kitchen, they would be determined to stay in the house and move upstairs. We thought they would just go away. No.
That's so funny, right? Because if we go back to the sort of ancient Mesopotamian myths, right? The myth of Inanna, the descent of Inanna. Okay, so Inanna found the halupa tree, which was sort of felled in a great flood. So she took it back to her god and planted it. And Lilith took up residence in the halupa tree, all right? And then Inanna cut it down. Because she wanted to make a bed and a throne out of it. So Lilith got evicted, and Lilith was just wild. She'd been evicted from her home. So, and what's the home? It's Moon. What's the mice in your kitchen and loft? It's Moon. It's
exactly. It's nature. And that's where I was making all those links, and I was thinking, which one do I go with first? Because I was also thinking about the story of Inanna and the outrage, and ultimately I feel that this is a wound of rejection, and as you say, it's a rejection, and it's at an incredibly deep level, because it's rejection through demonizing, and dare I say, othering. It's not a term I would normally use, but I think it's very appropriate in this case. It's the demonization of the other, and it's the othering. And what is unacceptable in the other is the seeing them as the barbarian at the gate, the uncivilized. And I think that is a huge part then of that wound of rage that Lilith is associated with. And of course it can turn destructive, absolutely, as did Inanna. And what is it that cured Inanna? It was compassion. Compassion when somebody saw her pain and cried tears for her, and was able to, because that's about the acceptance and integration then of what's been rejected.
Yeah, it is. And it's, I think it's the key is to working with Lilith and accepting Lilith. And Lilith's very Plutonian as well. There's a very strong kind of Pluto feel. And we know if we don't work with Pluto, it can be very destructive. But that otherness that you said there, imagine Lilith living in the cave by the Red Sea with the demons. I mean, she might have been quite happy, being quite independent there and do what she wanted, okay? But then picturing Adam continuing this wonderful life with the more compliant Eve in the beautiful, bountiful, earthy Garden of Eden, which Lilith was kind of exiled from, and she's living in the cave, being not acceptable, so to speak. You know, it's otherness, absolutely. And it also resonates with the myth of Chiron, being exiled from his herd and living in the cave, but being full of knowledge and wisdom. And this kind of takes us on another path, because Lilith is very multi-dimensional. And if we think about the moon being that incredibly deep and conscious energy and full of ancestral wisdom, you know, everything that's been passed down and experienced before, Lilith is an extreme version of that, full of wisdom and full of knowing and full of instinctive, intuitive energy. Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's hard to find more powerful outrage than in the child who feels unjustly punished. That sense of indignation, like we've all been through this as children, you know, that moment when we're accused of doing something we haven't done, or and then we're punished for it, or the child who is punished more harshly than the brother or sister. It is such a sense of pain, and indignation, and the sense of injustice that burns. It's like it's tattooed into us, that feeling. And it was just you talking about, you know, there she is, you know, banished into a world where there are demons. She may well have been quite afraid initially as well. You can imagine, you know, coming from Eden and suddenly there's demons everywhere. Well, what do I do? That's nobody likes to be banished from home. And then you've got this picture of, yes, paradise is still paradise. and I'm here and I'm not entirely sure of what I've done. And it just made me think about that child and a conversation that I was having with a client this very morning on this issue of that. And this is where, again, you know, in terms of therapy, where it becomes very important to understand this dynamic of psychology, because my client is suffering because of self-hatred. And everything that happens to her, seeing as a deep punishment, and feeling confused as to what she has done to deserve all of this. And that is a continuation. It is an internalized voice of the parents, because she was constantly demonized as a child, not for doing anything other than being a child.
Herself, and being herself.
But being, you know, the child who wasn't quiet. You see, this is the thing. We even have the term wild child, don't we? The wild child is the inconvenient child, the child who
doesn't fit the box, doesn't fit into regulated expectations of behavior.
And it's the behavior of the child does not need to be in any way extreme. All that you need is for the expectations to be unreasonable and not fit the child, which comes back to my conversation with the wonderful feline specialist yesterday, where we were talking about the demonization of cats because they don't fit in to what's expected. And so we have this, don't we? This whole setup, and I think it is very important that we understand it, because it's within each of us. It's in all our charts. So
of course. Yeah. It's really interesting what you say about cats, because this cat dog thing as well. So dogs are classed as trainable, all right? Cats are seen as these free spirits that aren't trainable. And I'm thinking the moon can be trained, right? Our emotional responses can be trained when we're conditioned as children, okay? We learn not to cry when it's not appropriate. We learn not to be angry or express our anger if it's not appropriate. So our emotional reactions can be conditioned, okay? But Lilith can't be. So the cats, I think, perhaps resonate with Lilith on some level, without a doubt. And it's really interesting because obviously cats are sort of very prominent in Egyptian mythology and worship, aren't they? I'm not a huge expert at all, but that just popped into my head and it came out without
Well, funnily,
without even knowing where I was going with it, to
we've
be
kind of we've
honest.
kind of digressed, but I think it's we haven't
No.
because it's the feline nature has been so maligned and associated with women because they were deemed to be the familiars of witches. And so,
Yeah.
cats, terrible things have been done to cats over the centuries. And continue, I think, to be in many places where they still have this this stigma attached to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
In other places, they're revered, and I believe in the Middle East they often are still very revered. Um, but it's it is exactly for that reason that the not fitting in, the being untrainable, the unpredictable, uncivilized, they are the epitome of the spirit of nature in a sense.
Yeah.
Um, that we talk about. Not to say that dogs aren't being demonized now, they often are. Um,
Yeah.
and I think this is a whole issue that we have as a species. We have to learn how to live with other species, but then again, we struggle on living with our
With
own.
ourselves.
Yeah, we struggle to have harmony within our own species. No wonder we
I
find it
know.
difficult to accept other species. And there's the word other again.
Other. And don't you think we project our own fears onto other species? So, dogs at the minute with all the XL bully attacks that are going on in this country, it's massive at the moment. But the likes of sharks as well, sharks have been demonized, okay, as something terrifying. Yeah, we know the film Jaws, which is one of my favorite films, that had a lot to do with it, but they've been demonized and treat so terribly, and they just exist within their own ecosystem, and they don't. Sharks naturally don't do what Jaws did. If shark attacks are so rare. But if we think, of all the sharks that have been killed over the years, they've been pulled out of the water with their fins cut off and then thrown back in still alive to make some soup. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, yeah,
It's
nice.
it's as we're talking again, it's that picture of what the relationship with nature, um, the damaging of nature because of what can't be controlled, uh,
Yeah,
without the attempt to understand. Um, and as you say, the fear. The fact of the matter is that cats do have claws. Dogs have jaws. um, Sharks also, but most animals, if treated with respect,
if we leave them alone, they leave
or
us
which
alone.
is the respect,
Yeah,
are not out to get us. That is not the usual. There are going to be exceptions,
of course.
and I can think of one or two species that actually would hunt us. Um, but on the whole, that's not the case. But I think what it shows, and we're coming back again full circle to Lilith, is the sense of vulnerability that we feel in when faced with forces that overpower us. So, nature is not Disneyland. Nature is wild
Primal.
and
Primal.
primal, and and up until they started with the geoengineering, um, um, you couldn't really tame her. So and I think it's dangerous to try to tame her, because otherwise what we are going to get is the demon side of Lilith, because we get the suppression of that energy, and then it erupts into something that's much more uncontrollable and dangerous. So we need to learn to work with this energy, whether it's in the natural world or whether it's within ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one dimension of Lilith is that Lilith always knows when something's not right. You know what, when you have that voice inside of you going, this isn't right, this isn't right. And often when we're younger, we don't listen to it. We just ignore that little voice, that warning voice within ourselves. Okay. That's Lilith telling us something isn't right. For example, if you went on a date with someone and had started a relationship with someone, and you're all caught up in the adrenaline and the excitement of whatever it is, and the sexual tension and all the excitement of a new relationship, but there's a little voice inside you going, no, something not right here, this isn't safe, there's just something not right. And I think that's the same for nature as well. Nature's trying to tell us something isn't right, but who's listening?
Absolutely. And that's the thing, isn't it? I think what it's showing us is the need to listen,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just wanting to rush in, take control, to listen. And
Yeah. Well,
whether it's listening to the animals we share our lives with, and hearing what they're trying to tell us, whether it's our children,
mm-hmm.
um, whoever it is, to be present and listen. And that always begins with listening to ourselves, to that inner voice.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And
yeah. Yeah,
so
it's like a collective wisdom, a collective voice that's been there for like eons, and it's ancient, ancient, deep, deep wisdom. It's moon, it's lunar, it's yeah, it's ancient, ancient wisdom, and it's choosing to move away from the physical, from the everyday concerns that we have, and going back to our instinctive selves. If we think back to sort of when we were cavemen, cave women, whatever, relied on instinct. We didn't have scientific knowledge in those days, did we? It was, you had to hunt, to kill, to eat, to survive, and it was all about instinct. And that's what Lilith is about, that ancient instinct that we should maybe listen to and work with more, but that we tune out in our daily lives, don't we? We do tune it out.
we tune it out, and then it leads to the eruption of outrage, as
Yeah,
we
yeah,
said.
yeah.
And yet that instinct is very, very much, it's more than just about survival. It is about survival, but it's also the very thing that will enable us to thrive. Because if we follow that instinct, then we know where we are going to be creative. Because that instinct, I feel, is the desire to create.
Hmm.
And if we allow ourselves to create, then there's the joy instead of the rage. And I think that that's important. And we must make clear here that this holds whether you're male or female. Um, it The desire to create, the instinct to create, the impulse to create is human. And so we need to have that opportunity to hear what it is that we want to create and how we go about it, but we often suppress it for pragmatic reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also we can suppress it because it might not be accepted. Creation can be, it can be literally creating a child, but it can be creating a piece of art, creating a book, creating some form of project. And sometimes we're afraid of our own creative impulse in case it's not accepted. What if you write a book or paint a picture that's not deemed acceptable?
And these days that's not difficult, because the issue with creativity is that it has, I think the birthright to be creative has been stolen from us. And the way in which it's happened is that we are told that unless we are going to study that aspect of creativity and become professional, then we're not good enough. What we're producing isn't good enough.
Yeah.
So you can't really sing, you can't really dance, you can't really paint, you can't really write. And in order to become a professional, you have to fit into whatever the latest definition of a money-making enterprise creativity is deemed to be. So if you're going to write, you're going to have to write to this specific definition of what the public wants. And somebody makes that decision. It's so
I've got a story to share there.
Yeah, it's so arbitrary. I have young clients who are doing their A-levels in art and are going to give up doing art because they're being told that they are not creative enough or not good enough. How dare anybody steal that from them?
Yeah.
Because they don't fit into
the criteria.
And that's it, isn't it? This is where we're at. So do you feel that Lilith is having anything to say about this at the moment?
Lilith will just say, stuff it, I'll go and do it my own way. And that's an acknowledged conscious Lilith. If Lilith can actually be conscious, that's a mature Lilith who'll just say, stuff it. Seriously, I'm going to go and do my own thing. And would you like me to share that story?
Yes, please.
Because it's just suddenly come to my mind how relevant this actually is. And, we are kind of just off the cuff here, which is lovely. So I wrote a novel, which I completed about a year ago. And it's all wrapped around the myth of Lilith, but it's fiction, okay? It's a story. So I wrote that. I love it. I've already started the sequel. So I went through the whole process of thinking, right, I must get an agent, I must get a publisher. And I've wasted a year of my life trying to get an agent. And even if you get an agent, there's no guarantee it'll then get published. And from the responses I got from the agents, because you don't always get a response, the majority of them were, yeah, it's great, but we don't like the concept. Okay, so I rewrote the concept a few times, wasn't getting anywhere. And it got to the point where I was like, I've actually rewritten the concept of my book and it doesn't feel like my concept anymore. And I got to the point and I'm like, stuff it. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm self-publishing next year. And that's what I'm going to do, because I then own the entire creative process of my book. I've got the creative rights. I've got the power over what happens with my book. If it sells 5 copies, so be it. If it sells 50 million copies, brilliant, But I own that creative right, and I'm sick to death of being told that they don't like the concept. There's my Lilith coming out, and the book's actually wrapped around the myth
Absolutely. And you know, that is such a fundamental statement
Mhm.
because yet again, the what it is to be civilized is to be a commodity. And again, the wild nature is not supposed to be a commodity. And the problem comes when we want to turn our creations into commodities.
Yeah,
And when we do that, we lose the heart of what it is to be creative.
exactly. And then we're not authentic. And Lilith demands authenticity.
And that's what I meant when I said our birthright to be creative
Yeah,
being has been largely stolen from us.
yeah, yeah,
And those who are allowed or deemed good enough
yeah,
by the paymasters still have their creativity stolen from them because it's been turned into a commodity and
yeah,
the heart is gone. So it becomes an artificial creativity.
yeah.
It's constructed.
Mhm.
So I think very few people get the opportunity to earn a living following their passions. But that doesn't mean that we must stop following our passions. We need to make time for them when we're back to listening to that voice within.
Yeah,
And Lilith, yet again.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Lilith will let you know when you're being true to yourself. Yeah, and if that means going and living in a cave, so be it.
Well, what a fabulous look at Lilith. Thank you so much, Lianne.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. It was no, that was really interesting because like I say, it was so off the cuff, wasn't it? And it was just so free and so true and authentic, and it was so Lilith.
I hope she's happy.
I think she is. I think she is.
Good. If people want to find out more about your work, how do they do that?
Okay, so I have my website, liannemccafferty.com. And then I've got the regular social media channels. I'm on Instagram, Lianne McCafferty. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I've got Lianne McCafferty Astrology on Facebook, and I've got my private page. But if you want to send a friend request, that's fine. And I've got a YouTube channel, which is kind of sits there a little bit, but it will be it will grow at some point. It will grow. I'm kind of spread in so many different directions at the minute. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll be putting a link to everything in the description
Oh,
box.
thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.